G'day folks, and welcome back to part 2 of the coal office kit that we're looking at. And this week we're going to put it together. And what I've done is I've updated the file a bit. I've added some extra bits and pieces into it. So this obviously is all printed out, and to go along with that, I might point out that I've added some barge boards and things like that in there. And to go along with that, I've got a sheet of scale scenes brick paper. That's TX07, if you're wondering what sort it is. So I've got that's the outer covering for the building. We've also got here, I've printed out some slate tiles. That looks pretty ordinary as it is there, but that'll be cut into strips that are 2 tiles wide, and you overlap the strips when you put them on the building. Comes up quite well actually, I've done it before. And also I've got some ridge capping as well. I've got too much there, but I can save whatever's left for any other buildings I do. But first of all, we have to, especially with the brick paper, we have to seal these. I use a spray sealer, and all I do is pin the sheets up onto a piece of polystyrene and spray both sides, make sure it's got a good coverage so it's well sealed. The last thing you want is the glue bleeding through the paper and washing away the ink, and it just ruins your model. I mean, that has happened to me in the past, and luckily in some cases you can get away with it by just redoing the actual section, the sheet of brick paper or whatever it is, and just glue another piece over the top. That's all fixed up quite easily. But it's worth taking the trouble to seal the thing first. And as I say, I just pin these things onto a piece of polystyrene, spray them both sides, just let it dry, walk away from it, and come back to it when it's all dry and ready to go. So we'll just push on now and see how we go. Last time we saw how to draw up the plans for the coal office in LibreOffice drawing program. So now we're on to the actual build of the office, and you can see that I've printed out the diagram, and I've actually broken it up and put the main parts of the building onto bits of odd card that I had, instead of just wasting an A4 sheet of card. So we've got that all stuck down there. I use Uhu to glue it to the card. Each part is labelled with a code that I understand, at least: W for wall, F for floor, etc., G for gable, and just to identify the parts more easily once they're cut out of the card. You can see the 2 gable ends there, and on the left is C for chimney. Now what I like to do is cut the openings out, the windows and the doorways, before I actually cut the part out of the larger piece of card. It just makes it easier to handle, and because these parts are going to be covered in brick paper, or most of them will, I've gone here past the intersecting points with my cuts, just so I get a cleaner corner there. So I would cut along that way and just past the side opening there, and then I would do the same that way. That gives that little cross effect there, but the part that's being removed comes out quite cleanly when you do it that way. I mean, if it was kit bashing a normal kit, I wouldn't do that, but in this case, as I say, it's been covered with brick paper, so those lines won't be seen at all. And here are, I would say, most of the building parts cut out and ready to go, waiting for assembly. We've got the 4 pieces here that form the chimney. They'll be glued on top of each other and then wrapped in brick paper. We've got the roof sections here for the little porch and the floor section there, side walls, the front wall. We've got floor here for the main building, the office there, 2 walls, a roof, and another roof section. Now this section here is marked out for the chimney, and it's a matter of calculating just how much of this has to be removed to fit the chimney in flush up against the wall. But that's a bit of trial and error with that, and slight adjustments here and there. You've got to make allowances for the chimney to fit in there once it's wrapped in paper as well. And some of the other bits and pieces now going down on card. These doors will have to be trimmed around this line here to get them down to their actual size, because I've decided to put them in both in the open position. If they were just going in the closed position, I could use this outer part to put glue on and fit them up flush against the wall. However, I won't be doing that. This is the porch floor and the signage for the building. I've also cut out the windows here, and that has to be done carefully to preserve this centre section here, which is very fine. So I usually run the knife along these 2 edges first before I do any of the other parts, and that helps to keep that intact because the rest of the paper here is holding it all together. Same applies to this section here, although it's not as critical. I took out this middle section here first, and then these smaller rectangles, and then put the cuts in here so that these sections here can be folded back into the window aperture. I also score lines along here, along all this dark bit where there's got to be a fold. There's a very light score there so that they will fold properly. Now the brick paper is starting to go on these gable ends here, and you'll notice that I've folded it over, and I've allowed a sort of a flap to be here. What I'm going to try with this is to lay it over the side walls to create almost a seamless joint. So the jury's out on that. We'll just have to see how that goes, but that's the reason why that looks like that. And I'm still waiting for glue to dry at this stage before cutting out the openings here, and then I've got one wall here also ready to go. There's no openings to be removed from that one. So finally cleared out the openings, and then it's time to add in the window surround here that was mentioned just a bit further back there. So all that's been added in and glued on. And this shows you how the seam is starting to work. That's the actual seam there, and it's not a bad effect. I'm not 100% sure about it, but it seems to work okay. And there's another view. So we've got our building just starting to go together. And of course we need to add in the doorways around here, so that's been fitted in, and the step here, if you like, that will be coloured black with some texture. Now I've started a bit of a chain reaction by leaving the doors open, and because I've
decided to leave the doors open on the building, you can actually see into the building, even though these little buildings are actually quite dark inside and it's very hard to see detail. I haven't really bothered with any other detail on the walls, etc., because it is quite dark in there. However, if you look in the doorway, you would see a white floor unless I covered it. So I decided to just print out a timber floor to go in there. So that's the reason why that's there. And on the right there, I've also got the window stuck onto some acetate, and then that's been glued onto the back of the wall there. So that's ready to go. And that's been fitted in there again with the attempt at a seamless joint, which is okay. There we are again. The 2mm card gives you a nice depth of wall. You can see it there on the window. It's rather nice instead of the thinner card that you get with some of the kits. And there's the floor fitted in, which is starting to make the whole building quite a bit more rigid now. And there's a comparison with the original Super Quick kit, which is looking very, very tired there on the right. Another view of the joint. And an overhead view. Now we've got the 4 walls connected. And this here is actually the top of the door, this section here. So that's glued in place. That's the internal door. And yeah, it's coming along. So now it's time to start working on the porch, and following the same principles as with the main office building. The door surround's been added on. We've got the flap for the seam, the seamless seam again on both sides, and the floor is fitted in, which makes the whole thing rigid. And also it's been coloured there with texture. That was a white section there, so we've just coloured that up with texture. And then we can add the porch onto the front of the building, being careful to line up the points of the gables here. I've just done that by eye, so hopefully it's in line. And you can see what I was saying about looking through the building with the doors open. This door on the left here is pretty much the same width as the depth of the porch itself, so it blocks out that wall behind it. But you can actually see through into the office there, and the floor is quite obvious there. So I'm glad I did that. And because you can see in the door here, I thought, well, the right hand wall on the internal part of the porch there, I could either leave it white or just cover it in brick paper. So that's what I decided to do, cover it in brick paper. And there's an overhead view. Sorry it's a bit fuzzy, but that's showing it all going together there. And you get a good idea of the orientation of the doors. Now the chimney. These 4 pieces are sat on top of each other and glued to each other. One has finished up a little bit shorter than the others, so I've put that in the centre because I thought, well, it's more important to have the outside edges at the same length or flush or whatever, so that once that's covered in paper, this one that's slightly shorter here will just fit up inside. It'll do its job quite admirably, but it's just a bit shorter than the others, and that won't be seen at all. If it was to be put on the outside edge here, we'd have a slightly lopsided chimney, so that's why it's in the middle there. And now here we are, covered in brick paper. Now this is a great solid little chimney now. It won't bend like the one on the other kit. And here's a bit of a test fit with the roof, just to see how it goes. And now it's time to start on the roof sections. So I cut out strips of the slates 2 slates wide, and then glue the strip onto the roof panel starting from the bottom of the roof, and then the next strip that comes along overlaps this first strip by 1 layer, so you get that sort of 3D effect on the roof, and it looks like that. And at this stage we just go completely across the cutout for the chimney, and we'll come back and sort that out later once this is all dry. There's no point in trying to sort of line them up with the edge of the chimney here. It's easier just to run a strip straight across, and when it's all dry just come back and cut it out. And it looks like that when you're finished. Now if you're fussy, or you want to improve the look a bit more, you can go along and do all these cuts where the slates are, the individual slates, and further improve the look of the building. But my life's a bit too short to keep doing that, so I'll just go with this method here. And that's what they look like once they're trimmed up. These edges will have to be done in black with texture, and that's how they look once they're ready. They're ready to go on the building there. And also, because I've got a bit of overhang, eaves in effect, I like to colour under there as well. And now we're ready for the small roof sections for the porch area, and it's the same principle as the other one. Just start laying the strips on, glue them down, let it dry, and then trim them up, and then colour the edges with texture. And while that's waiting to dry, I've decided to stick the chimney top, that's it there, and gables onto some cereal box card, and I've cut out the chimney top there, and that's been fitted onto the chimney. And what I will do is make a chimney pot here. I'll make that out of a small rivet, and turn down the head on the rivet slightly, and then just colour it up. They make quite good chimney pots. And there's the small sections ready to go on. So really it's probably easier to put the small sections on the porch roof first, because they're down below the main roof, so it just makes it a bit easier to fit those first. Now you may remember from the drawing that one roof section is longer than the other, so one actually overlaps the other when you get to the top here. Now that would be a problem if you weren't putting gables on, because it would be quite obvious. You would see the overlap on the joint here, although you can't see it in this picture here, it's a bit too dark. But because these yellow gables are going on the end here, barge boards I should say, not gables, they will cover that up. So it's really coming together now. The porch roof's on, and you can see the overlap there that I was talking about. That section there's the overlap. And the main roof uses the same principle. However, this is the long side here. This is the overlapping piece. You can see the overlap up here. Now that's going to be covered with ridge capping, and barge boards will be fitted on this end as well, as I said. She's all coming together there. Now we start fitting the barge boards. So I've started with the porch first. Just get that little one done and out of the way, and then onto the main building. And now's the time to start fitting ridge capping. So what I did was, before I cut this ridge capping out of its sheet of paper, I scored a line down the middle of it very lightly so that it will fold easily, and then they're carefully measured up and fitted onto the building, and it looks something like that. And then the signage is fitted onto the ridge capping, simply glued on top. And there we have it. Now there's a comparison with the original building. It's not exactly the same, but it's a close relative. And this is what I was saying about looking through the doorway. Now you can see it's quite a lot darker in there now, but you do get a suggestion that there is something going on in there with the light coming through the windows, and you can make out the wood grain on the floor. And that's the old building. They used the door shut method. And this is approximately what it's going to look like on the railway. It would have to have this, I think it's going roughly here. I'll have to dig out this gravel here so it sits nicely into the ground there, instead of looking like it sits on top of it. So there we are, folks. That's how it's done. Cheers. Gormo.